everyone. Welcome to the program. This is Sunday Politics, live on China's television. I'm Sean Wakimalo here in Abuja. Tonight, we begin our first conversation around the issue of security. But specifically, we begin from an attention that we've now been paying on the subject steering deep national debate, and it's about the de-radicalization and the reintegration of repentant Boko Haram members. As the Nigerian government continues, it's controversial, and yeah, a lot of people have described and criticized the process as such that is aimed at rehabilitating former insurgents and reintegrating them into the society. Many citizens and security experts are raising tough questions about the process. And interestingly, these repentant terrorists have now been de-radicalized in that system in their hundreds, sometimes 800, sometimes 400, in their numbers in short. Some argue that true repentance from terrorism is rare, warning that releasing these individuals pose serious risk to national security and to the communities that have suffered at their hands, and then having to spend the state's resources on those who have been the enemy of the state. Others insist that lasting peace requires forgiveness and strategic rehabilitation. But in that sense, what is justice even? I mean, can you say those who have attacked the state, walked against the state, enemy of the state, shot down innocent citizens, killed them, massacred some communities? Would you say that justice is served when they say, oh, we have repented, and now they're being brought back into the society? On what basis? Tonight, we'll unpack these divergent views and assess the effectiveness of Nigeria's de-radicalization framework and ask, are we building peace or planting the seeds of future conflict? Plus, my guest tonight has expertise in air fire power, how we can combat terrorists and insurgents from the skies. And this is one thing that the governor of Zulum, governor of Borno State, Governor Zulum, has raised a lot of questions about the air support to the ground defense on the Nigerian soil, and say, look, a lot of these energies have been spread in some part of the country. So let's get talking. Tonight, I'm being joined by Group Captain Sadiq Garba Shehu, who is a retired military officer, an adjunct professor at the Joseph Marshall European Center for Security Studies, and is also the CEO of Conflict Security and Development Consult Limited. He's live for us here in our Abuja studio. It's a pleasure having you join us tonight on the program.
Good evening, Show. Good evening.
My first question is, do terrorists repent?
A very valid question. Experts are of the opinion. First, you know, I think it's very clear to look at the terms. When you talk of the terms, you talk of disarmament, demobilization, de-radicalization, and integration. Each of these terms, even though they are combined together, they have different terms. When you talk of disarmament, that is to take away the weapons. When you talk of demobilization, that is to break away the terrorist group. When you talk of the radicalization, which is the controversial term, that is to reduce extremist behaviors and their integration, returning the people back to society. Now, experts in these matters, you know, there are those who believe de-radicalization, that is changing the mindset of a terrorist, is possible. However, there's a strand of thoughts who believe, you know, hear people saying that once a terrorist, always a terrorist. There are those who believe that belief system cannot be changed. So rather than de-radicalization, they talk about disassociation. That is making the person being, you know, treated to remove him from, from violent activities. Having said that, people generally are very skeptical about the de-radicalization program. But then we have to ask, how does de-radicalization, or rather amnesty, come into it? We have to understand that in war, like in the olden days, even war has its rules and regulations. Under the Geneva Conventions, specifically the Additional Protocol 2, and even in that you are talking of Article 6.5, it talks about how to end a non-international armed conflict. There are two types of conflict. An international armed conflict, for example, is like the one between Russia and Ukraine, one country versus another. ending such a conflict is very neat. At the end of it, you transfer prisoners of war and everybody goes to his country. Unfortunately, a non-international armed conflict where the opponents is the government versus people who are citizens. The ideal way to end a non-international armed conflict like we're having with Boko Haram is to arrive one day and say all Boko Haram have been killed in action. You don't have problem with that. But unfortunately, that is never a feasible solution. So definitely, you are going to have those that are injured and you capture them. You are going to have those that have surrendered. You are even going to have those who are not fighters, but they were taken into the bush by force by Boko Haram. Now, under international law, you cannot say those people are no longer in Nigeria. And after arresting them, it will be a war crime to say, okay, land them, all of them up and kill them. Even if you say you are taking them to court, some will be convicted, some will be found not guilty, some will be given jail time, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years. When they finish, they are still there. So this is where the problem comes. In a non-international armed conflict, you are still left with people who are citizens and you have to find a way of treating them. That's where Article 6.5 of the Additional Protocol of Geneva Convention comes in. And it says, I'm going to quote almost verbatim, at the end of the hostilities, the government in power should endeavor to give amnesty as widely as possible to fighters who are remaining after the conflict. But this is where the catch is. Remember, I started at the end of the conflict. That is to say, the amnesty, recommended by the additional protocol is at the end of the conflict. This is where I have a little problem in the Nigeria. Can we say we have come at the end of the conflict? And also it goes further to explain that the amnesty is not a blanket amnesty. It's amnesty for low-level fighters who had low-level engagement. But anybody who is found to have committed murder, have committed arson, have committed rape, has killed people, such people must face the law. So these are the two, caveats in carrying out an amnesty program. First, it should be at the end of the conflict. Secondly, it should not be a blanket amnesty. Now, probably this is where we may have challenges in Nigeria. And what do they say at the end of the conflict? At the end of the conflict, you even have, more processes of justifying who is a high level, who is low level. And also, when you say at the end of the conflict, you make it as an incentive for the people that you are fighting, to stop the war and then come out. So in essence, this is why this amnesty is coming into it. It is something that Nigeria has signed because Nigeria in 1988, if I remember correctly, signed the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention. And by international law, whenever you sign a convention, you have, a duty to abide by its contents.
We've seen amnesty in the Niger Delta. And by the Geneva Convention that you quoted, you said at the end as a caveat, at the end of the hostilities. Yes. The hostilities in the northern region of the country is not yet over, is it?
I think this is one of the challenges of the amnesty program we're having. There are many reasons why you have to leave it.
Is what we see in the north amnesty?
What has been done with Boko Haram?
Boko Haram.
It's amnesty. It's part of the amnesty. That's why they have been de-radicalized.
So is it who declares amnesty? Is it the terrorists? Because by the definition of the de-radicalization process, what we are hearing is that the terrorists have given up. They have come forward to say they have repented. So does it fit into the concept of amnesty as provided? And I'm imagining that Nigeria is following the Geneva Convention and its procedure in de-radicalization, or this process of reintegrating those who have bestowed hostility on the state by this definition. Does it fit in, or is it just out of place?
Your question was whether it is the Boko Haram themselves that declare. No.
Who declares amnesty?
It's the state. It's the state that declares. That's what the Geneva Convention says. He said those in power.
Like what we saw in Niger Delta, when the president at the time, Umar Musa Yar'Adua, came out and said, there's a declaration of amnesty. Bring out your arms, lay it down, and there was an amnesty program that was declared. And all those who are agitators and those who led the agitation in the region came up and said they surrendered. And that was how the amnesty program began. In that sense. So this is the opposite, isn't it?
Well, it is the timing we have to look at. Has conflict, because that is what I quoted almost the exact words of this thing. At the end of hostilities. At the end of the hostilities. So we may debate whether have we really come to the end of hostilities in the Northeast before we declare the amnesty? And secondly, the fact that I said it shouldn't be a blanket amnesty, but the processes of determining what is the level of involvement is something that should be done from the moment you arrest, a Boko Haram member. Where did you arrest him? When did you arrest him? What is he carrying? What was he doing? And even making inquiries around the areas. Has this guy attacked a village? Has he killed somebody? But if you don't do that, and like unfortunately we did in Nigeria, you arrest them, you keep them in prison for over 10 years, all the evidence that might have even assisted you in determining the level of involvement has been lost. And then again, the timing. But I must also point out that while the other amnesty we had was for the Niger Delta, there is a slight difference. In the Niger Delta, it is not, in technical terms, an armed conflict that we had in Niger Delta. Whereas in the Boko Haram, there is a declaration of war, if we remember, during the Jonathan regime. So these are two different things. International humanitarian law does not address issues like the Niger Delta. It is concerned with armed conflict.
So when you mentioned the word amnesty, yes, that was why, because that's the closest to the term in terms of the situation, unrest in the country. And that's why I was making the reference, and I'm wondering whether or not it fits into what the Geneva Convention has provided. Yes. So in your definition and in your analysis, you think that it is ill-timed, the process of this de-radicalization?
Yes, if I take here, I'm talking like an expert in international humanitarian. If I take
an academic and an ex-military man.
Yes. And also somebody who does lectures on counterterrorism. If we take the definition as given by that Article 6.5 of Additional Protocol 2, it says at the end of hostilities. And at the end of hostilities, like everything in law, the ICRC, that's the National Committee of the Red Cross, they went further to explain what is meant by at the end of hostilities. It says when there is a ceasefire signed, that is one aspect. When the opposing forces are no longer carrying out military operations, when there is a surrender document that has been signed. This is when you say at the end of hostilities. So unfortunately, if we look at these definitions, then there may be, some, doubt as to whether in the Nigerian context, we have reached that stage of at the end of hostilities.
So the big question one will be asking is that if this process is being granted to the Boko Haram terrorists. So you ask yourself, those who are arrested in the IPOB agitation in the Southeast, those who are arrested in the bandits that have been arrested in the Northwest, those laws are not, or these principles are not applicable. And I remember the very informed position of the Supreme Court Justice Oputo, who said, justice has about 3 or so phases. The justice to the state, justice to the offender, yes, and the justice to the victim. Now, so and you wonder, what kind of justice does this serve? Is this justice when you now bring those who say, "Oh, I've repented. I'm a terrorist. I've killed 100 people, but I've repented," and those who say, "These guys do not repent"?
Well, like I said, if you recall my explanation of what the relevant section of AP said, it said it is not a blanket amnesty. So just saying I have surrendered does not automatically qualify you for amnesty under the Geneva Conventions. It qualifies you for amnesty after saying you have surrendered, an investigation was carried out, you have not committed war crime, you have not committed rape, you have not burnt a house, you have not killed somebody. That's when you qualify for amnesty. Because again, even from our local knowledge, we know in the Boko Haram, there are people who were forcefully abducted. There are women who were turned to housewives. And then as human beings, we've heard of those cases. Some love or attachment will come with a Boko Haram member. If you catch those ones, these are the kind of people that will, in fact, Boko Haram, they even have people who farm for them. They have people who fish for them. This is what is meant by low-level attachment. If you could find proof that somebody was used as a farmer, was used as or he was taken as a child with his mother, and he grew up with Boko Haram. These are the people that will go amnesty. So the just rule, I surrender does not qualify you. Does not qualify you.
But that's the basis upon which our system here operates, isn't it?
Well, to be honest, this is where the difficulty is, like I said. If you don't start the process of sifting then you are going to have a problem, because you will end up giving blanket amnesty. And blanket amnesty is not what international law said.
How dangerous is that?
Well, it's dangerous in so many aspects. First, you could have what is called recidivism. That is somebody, you know, who is really a hardline Boko Haram, he could go back to the bush. Not only that, you raise the other issue of justice to the victims. You could encourage impunity because the person is not. So that's why the law says you have to categorize. So I just want it to be clear that saying I have surrendered is not the condition for amnesty. The condition is you have been determined as not having committed any grievous harm. That's why you qualify for amnesty.
So you look at all of the, researchers have come out to say, what are the real causes of this extremism, terrorism in Nigeria? And there are about 5 or more reasons that have been given. Some say that political manipulation. Some say religious extremism. Some say poverty. Some say youth budge. Some say inequality. And these are reasons that have been given. So you wonder whether or not you can actually unplug these radicalization that already existed in the head of that person. And I remember, let me give you this scenario. A lot of people, and perhaps I've not been able to tell this story. In my experience as a journalist, visiting and General Christopher Olukolade was the spokesperson of the military, of the Nigerian army at the time. And I approached him, I said, I want to be embedded into the Boko Haram war in the Northeast region. And that was when we had the opportunity to fly over Chibok to visit Yola, then we visited Maiduguri. And one of those days, I asked the question that I wanted to wake up in the middle of the night to actually go and see how the military play the offensive at night, because he told me that there are operations at night, because this is sometimes when they fight the war. When we woke up in the morning, I met a mother who spoke to me, and I had an interpreter. He spoke in Hausa, and he said to me that he's so sad that one day one of their children, who had been missing for about 3 weeks, came back with dagger, with a knife, and beheaded and stabbed all the members of the family. He'd not been at home for about 3 weeks. He was missing. They were looking for him. He just came back. The day they saw him, he looked changed. He looked so fierce looking. And he came into the house and beheaded and stabbed all members of his family and neighbors. And he went away. This is a kind of situation people face. And you look at what could have led such a young person to come back home after being missing for 3 weeks and behead and stab members of his family. This is a live experience that I had visiting the spot of the insurgents in the Northeast region of the country. So that brings me to the question of those things that cause this extremism. How easy is it to unplug?
It's not easy. And like I said, even the most renowned expert of the radicalization cannot assure you that, because like you said, it's like going into his head. Nobody can assure you that somebody who said he has been de-radicalized will remain de-radicalized forever. There is no expert that will tell you that. However, I pointed to you what led to this de-radicalization program. The fact is that in a non-international armed conflict, okay, supposing you the people that surrendered or the people that you injured, and they are Nigerians, what are you going to do with them? It is a practical question. But again, I emphasize, there is nobody that can tell you that radicalization is going to. That's why some people even bring the theory of disassociation. Disassociation. That is to say, you could teach the man to discard the violent aspect of that belief, but removing the belief is very rare. That's what most experts say. But having said that, these issues are being brought as the only practical way of ending a non-international armed conflict, as opposed to an international armed conflict. Now, at a certain time, Russia and Ukraine, they will come and sign a document. They will say we have ended the conflict. What does it remain? The Russians holding Ukrainians, they will release them. Ukrainians holding Russians, they will release them. Everybody will go about his country. Unfortunately, such a neat ending of conflict is not possible in a non-international conflict. The only ideal you could have is where you have killed all Boko Haram, but we know that is not possible. Some will surrender. Some will come out. Some will, you know, so many things. So again, under international law, what do you do with those people? Even if you say you're going to take them to prison, you have to convince the court that they are going to be imprisoned. If they're imprisoned, they will have to serve their time and come out. So this is, I think, this de-radicalization or amnesty, as it is brought as a practical solution on how a country that is fighting its own citizen, how do we end that war? This is the problem. It's a practical solution that is brought for non-international armed conflict.
So would you say that is working in our situation, especially the report of a few of them who are now being reported to have gone rogue again?
Well, the last time I checked, because, you know, I spoke about recidivism. What is recidivism? Somebody will come out and say he has gone all the DRR program, but then he takes weapon and goes back. Here, I do not have facts, but in my inquiry, what I get from the authorities in Borno State, where the regulation and even the one that is done by federal government, is that they do not have a case of recidivism. That is, so far, they have not had a case of somebody who has gone through that program has gone back. That's what I have officially from them. And I do not have any contrary. There might be. I hear that, but I said I took time to ask, because I know, based on what I told you, starting while the war is going, one of the things that could happen is recidivism. That's somebody going.
What do you think is the best mode for us to, in the approach, especially for those who, because this debate is packed, and the people are agitating because a few days ago, yesterday and 2 days ago, in Borno State, about hundreds of repentant Boko Haram were reintegrated,
yes. And
they started, some graduated, yes. And you see them in the white and green, they were done in the uniform.
Yes.
And there are those who say, look, this thing will backfire. And in your own sense and your experience, what do you think would work best for our situation?
Well, like I said, such a program, first, it's a long-term program. It is a very expensive program, because if you don't go the whole way, if you do it halfway, it will backfire. What do I mean backfire? If you say reintegration, which is the last aspect, that is return the people to the society, they have to have a means of livelihood. Get the point? If you keep them in one place, always giving them lunch and dinner, there is no pride in such a return. And it is that kind of thing that could push some of them to go back into the bush. So the point I'm making is that, like I said, it is not the best, but it's a practical solution of ending the war. Because what do you do with them? You can't take them to Cameroon. You can't take them to Niger.
Can you train them to now start fighting for the state?
That's another issue. If you have said you have de-radicalized them, and you're sure they're de-radicalized, just like any other citizens, they have the right to join any work they want to do. But again, like I told you, there is no expert in the world.
Does the law of the nation allow repentant terrorists to join the military?
Well, again, that's another issue, because when the military wants to employ some people, there are background checks. Were you a criminal? Do you have a criminal case? Do you have a mental case? So that's another issue. If the military thinks they fail based on the fact they have allegiance, they may not take them. Again, that's another. I'm happy you raised this issue. There is always this debate that some of them have been recruited into the military. What I hear officially is that there are no such people. But the story, or can say the rumor, whatever, continues. Have they been recruited? Actually, I mean, I do not have a.
Should you think that? Do you think that this kind of gesture should be handed to bandits, and all the extremists that we find across the nation?
Again,
the Northeast situation is special.
The Northeast situation. This is what I want people to understand. When you see, whenever you mention Geneva Convention, you are talking of a war situation. For some, it's not every fight. Let me say this. It's not every fight or every security problem that equals into a war or armed conflict. The Boko Haram in the Northeast goes into a war from the moment, I can't remember the date, when former President Jonathan went and said the territorial integrity of Nigeria is being attacked. From that day, he has declared a war. As a national leader, he has the right to declare that his country is at war. That is what he said that time. So we have a war. But when you talk about the Niger Delta, when you talk about the bandits, technically, that's under the law of armed conflict. It is not a war. So
even when the government declared those persons as terrorists against the state?
Declaring terrorists is different from declaring war.
Okay.
There are steps of declaring a war. A government will make an announcement that from so and so date, we declare that Nigeria has a war. And that's what was done with Jonathan. People forget. All the other, whether you say IPOB, what I say, there is no declaration of war. Declaration of war is different from declaring a group as a terrorist. So
is a is a war climate that determines whether an amnesty can be instituted. But then my question would be, in your training of the military, in the military, should you find someone you are one-on-one with a terrorist and a person, what is the signal of surrendering or of a surrender as a military officer or as a military man? How do you know that the enemy has surrendered, and what were you taught how to treat someone who surrenders in the moment of war?
A very good question. Surrender is done in many ways. If he's maybe in a bunker or anything, he could wave a white flag. In international humanitarian law, that means the person you are supposed to hold your fire. If it is an individual, he'll come up with his hand raised up and drop his weapon. That is surrender. And this is where the catch is. If you're a professional soldier, as soon as somebody surrenders, you cannot shoot him.
That is the standard.
That's
how
standard.
you are trained.
That's the training.
Even when the person has killed all your colleagues and killed, all of a sudden he drops one and raises his hand up. How easy could that be?
I said professional soldier.
Yeah.
A professional soldier is trained to control his emotions. In controlling his emotions, despite the fact that the best person has, it's not easy, but that is what the training does to you. A professional soldier knows that he cannot shoot somebody after the person has surrendered. But whatever happens while you are exchanging fire, all that is
these bandit leaders, all of a sudden appears and raises his hand.
It still applies as surrender.
All right.
But as a professional military man.
Before you go on the program, you heard what Governor Zulum said in respect of how thin we have drawn the Nigerian military and how the fear that these terrorists are now regaining strength and energy in Borno State. And perhaps your parting shot on what we need to be doing, especially those who feel that we need the area digital surveillance and area firepower to be able to aid, and that also can give us a quick response, and we don't have to have stationed equipment in one place. If there is a response, and how does it work anyways? Because the concern of the governor is that it seems the attention has shifted to the north central, the northwest.
Whether it's possible it has shifted to north central or northwest, but why? There is one issue that since we started this Boko Haram 15 years that comes, this issue of overstretch. I think, with due respect, even a Kabu driver in Nigeria has had this: the military is overstretched, the police is overstretched. Now we have to ask the question: this problem of overstretch for 15 years, is it a problem that cannot be solved? Overstretch is a function of this thing. The last time I checked the terrorism, the global firepower index, what they said is Nigeria has over 50 million people of military age. So you wonder why for 15 years we have been talking overstretch, as if overstretch should be for a country that doesn't have population. Nigeria has population.
But do we have the money for recruitment?
If you have a problem with security, you have to, that's why they say emergency, when they say declare emergency. That means you have to suspend other activities you are doing and put money, because without security you don't have anything. So honest, in this case, I see lack of government commitment to really solve this overstretch. Overstretch. Everybody is talking about overstretch. But we have young men. Even as a retired military man, almost every year, there is no day that about 10 or 20 young men will call me and say, please help me to enter the military. So I think this overstretch, we have overflowed this issue, but the government is not doing about it. In the Tinubu administration's manifesto, he called a number that he wants to listen. With due respect, it didn't start from him. Even during Buhari, we didn't do any, very specific, this. If we go back to history, when the Civil War started, within 1 year, the strength of the Nigerian military quadrupled. Why are we not doing the same at this issue? So honest, I think when we mention this overstretch, and to be honest with you, something like counterterrorism, because what is happening, people are running and leaving their farms. People are going as IDPs, people are going as terrorism. Do you know what will make them to stay? Is when they see security personnel near them. Technology cannot do that for you. I'm not saying technology is useless, but what people see is to see military physical presence, and you can only do that with numbers. Technology has its place, but I'm not among those who say, no, you don't even need boots on the ground. What you need is technology. Each one, it's on purpose. So what I am saying is government should really put its money where its mouth is. This overstretch, we have been saying it for 15 years. We have young men and women who want to enter the military. This overstretch is something that can be solved.
Group Captain Sadiq Garba Shehu is a retired military officer, and at the moment is an adjunct professor at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, and also the CEO of Conflict Security and Development Consult Limited. Thanks so much indeed, always for this insight that you share with us. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.